Hello and welcome, Crofton High School learners, for the Spring 2022 second semester. This is the Intro to Web Development course that I am teaching, and in our first lesson here, we're going to be taking a look at some HTML tags in order to set up a generic template that we can use when we're trying to create our web pages. And we're also going to be looking at a number of tools that are going to help us be successful not only in this class, but outside of the classroom. So let's go ahead and dive in here. Now, one of the first things that I always like to introduce learners to are the reference pages. And so for HTML5, which is the most recent version of HTML and the version of HTML that our course is going to be based on, the W3 HTML5 reference is an amazing document. Now, this may look a little terse or possibly not very informative. However, when we start to click on some of the links that are here, we're going to see some very interesting information. So let's go ahead and start at the very beginning almost about the Doctype Declaration, because this is the first declaration that we're going to find at the very, very top of each of the HTML files that we're going to create. And this is going to be the first line or declaration that's going to be placed into our template. Now you can see here, and this is obviously a little bit small, so let's try to increase the size a little bit. Whoops. I guess we'll go back to the top here and come back down to the Doctype Declaration, and you can see that it's just simply the less than sign, the exclamation mark, Doctype in all caps, and I'll make a comment on that as to whether it has to be all caps or not here in a second, and then HTML. Now, all this is doing is declaring the version of the HTML that's being used on this page. That's what the Doctype declaration does. And if this is all that's here, that means it's HTML5. Now, the predecessor to HTML5 was HTML 4.01. And you'll see that they cleaned up what used to be put up there for the Doctype. And in fact, it gets even worse down here as to how much information you needed to put into that Doctype statement. And so this was a significant improvement because now all that's required for HTML5 is simply the Doctype HTML statement you see right here. Now, Doctype does not have to be in uppercase. However, just as you see here, this is probably the more popular way to introduce this line, this declaration into your HTML file. And this is exactly how you're going to see me do it, with Doctype capitalized, and then all other HTML tag related information is going to be lowercase. Now, you could also make HTML right here uppercase if you would like. However, this is highly recommended. That syntax and that exact typecasing there, like uppercase and lowercase, that is what I am going to recommend you use, and be consistent. Again, that's one of the keys. You want to make sure that if you're doing it one way, that you're doing it the same way in all of your files, right? For consistency's sake. And again, those reference pages that you see here, and if we were to scroll back up to the top, there is a ton of information in here about all of these different elements and declarations and tags. We've got metadata content, all kinds of stuff that we're going to be touching on as we make our way through this course. And again, this document is complementary to the HTML5, the HTML5 guide. It looks like they are no longer linking to that guide. All right, so the W3C HTML5 reference is a very valuable reference to use. Next up is going to be the site that we're going to be using for the course, but we're going to be using this in a very interesting way. So we're going to be starting with Intro to HTML CSS. Now, some of you may have had some HTML or CSS in the Foundations course when we did Unit 2 in the Foundations of Computer Science course. And not knowing how long ago that was or how much of that information you retained, we're going to be starting here at the Khan Academy Intro to HTML, CSS Making Web Pages course. And you can see that this is going to bring us up to speed and hopefully put everybody on level footing or solid grounding here, solid footing, as we make our way into the next Khan Academy course. And if I was to come in here and click search for the courses, if I was to put in JavaScript, you can see that we've got HTML and JavaScript making web pages interactive. So after we finish the intro course here in the Khan Academy, this is where we're going to be coming. And we're going to be talking about the document object model of a web page, or the DOM, JavaScript, access methods. We're going to be looking at a lot of different information here with respect to HTML and JavaScript and making web pages interactive. Now, if I was to click on the courses link as well and come to computer programming, you can see that there's the intro course we just looked at. Here is the HTML JavaScript making web pages interactive. And then we're going to be wrapping up with HTML and JavaScript making web pages interactive with jQuery. So we're going to be covering a lot of ground in this course with respect to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and all of the video tutorials I'm doing are going to be following and basically scaffolding or creating the foundation for you to first watch the course, or to first watch the video, and then when you show up for the course, we're able to talk about that information, and you've already been exposed to some of the things that you're going to see. Next up is the Repl website, and I actually have, I believe, the Repl website open here, or do I not? It doesn't look like I do. Let me just go ahead and click on Repl. And again, all of the resources I'm showing you are 100% free. Now, if you don't want to sign up, and again, it's 100% free, I can't recommend this highly enough. And for our course, you are going to need to sign up for Repl, so not a bad idea to do that now. Again, when you go to sign up, you would sign up with your Google credentials, and you can see I'm kind of already logged in here. And so let's say that you're logged in and you want to create a Repl, right? So all you would need to do is click on the three bars here, then click on Create Repl, and take a look at that. My favorites, because these are the ones I've been doing most often recently. And we're interested in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, this is accessible whether you're on your Chromebook, whether you're at home on your home computer, or, on the road somewhere. So you've got access to Repl 24/7, 365, as long as the site's up and you've got internet access. You can get to this site to practice your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript. So I'm just simply going to click on that. It's going to give me this sort of ambiguous, meaningless name over here. And I'm just going to put in here, Test Repl HTML. And that is the Repl that I'm going to create right now. Again, I'm just going to come down here and click on Create. And what's going to happen is it's going to give me a default configuration here. Now you can see I've got my index.html file, I've got my script.js JavaScript file, and I've got my style CSS file. And I'm going to come back to this tab, and we're going to talk about how we might want to organize these files a little bit better going forward, and how you're going to see I have things organized on my local Mac, which is where I'm making this recording. So let's take a step back over here, and that's Repl. Again, this is a high-level overview. We're going to be diving deeper into each of these tools as the course progresses. Now, another tool that you can use is Codepen Dot Io. And you can see right here, if you're looking to do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all you would have to do is sign up, and you can sign up. It is 100% free. And you can sign up with your email, Facebook, GitHub, or Twitter. So again, another free resource similar to Repl. Now, again, we're going to be using Repl extensively in our course. Now, you'll notice the Khan Academy, Repl, and Codepen all have something in common. And that is that the files and the code that you're creating are located on their site. Now, there are ways to integrate GitHub and to maybe move the code from Repl to GitHub or make it available via GitHub. However, that's a little outside the scope of what we're going to be doing. So Khan Academy, Repl, and Codepen, the code you're creating is on their site, so you would then have to access their site in order to get back to that code. Now, what if as I was asked repeatedly during the second unit of Foundations when we were working on HTML code and code.org, what if I wanted to do that HTML development on my local system? How might I do that? Well, the first thing that you would need to do that is a text editor. And so I can't recommend brackets highly enough. And so brackets used to be an Adobe free product. And again, it's made with love and JavaScript. And why use brackets? It's 100% free. And for a free tool, it is absolutely amazing. Now, you'll notice that I have brackets right here. And this is what brackets looks like. And you can see that it's very intuitive when we save the file as an HTML file, and it's based off that file name extension. And file name extension is the extension that comes after the period. So HTML at the very end, so it's after the period at the very end of the file, that is the file name extension. And take a look at this. What is the very first line we see here in this sample index.html file provided by brackets? We see the Doctype HTML, and we also see it in the uppercase, lowercase scheme that I had pointed out earlier. And this is typically how you're going to see that Doctype statement telling us that, hey, this is an HTML5 HTML file. And that's how this file should be interpreted and treated by web browsers. Now, if I go to the brackets and I go to About Brackets, you can see it's release 2.0, and this is a pre-production release. As you can see here, it says pre-release, which means you may run into some bugs. 1.142, which again is just as good as 2.0, is a stable release. Now, I'm running the pre-release version 2.0 because I'm interested in seeing what bugs do I run into, what are the new features that might be here. So again, there's nothing wrong with running either of these versions. If you're on a Mac and you go to run this pre-release version 2.0, you may, and again, I want to stress, you may run into an issue where it pops up and says that it can't run it. And if that's what ends up happening, they give you a line of code that you just basically run in your terminal window. And to get to the terminal, you would go to your Finder, you would go to Utilities, and you'll see Terminal Window. You would simply open the terminal window up, cut and paste the single line, run it, and then brackets 2.0 will work. If you don't want to hassle with that, you can download version 114.2, and that will run without any problems. So again, this is a free text editor. If you're on Windows, brackets will work on Windows and Mac. It's free for both platforms. If you're on Windows, maybe you want to look at Notepad. And again, Notepad, which comes with Windows, doesn't have sort of the color coding. And let me show you what I mean. Maybe we make a mistake here by removing that greater than sign. And you see this all turned to red here, indicating that, hey, there is a problem here. And Notepad is not going to do that. Again, Notepad is your bare bones text editor. Will Notepad work? It will absolutely work. However, I would highly recommend using brackets. Now, there are other tools that are out there. If I come back over here to the slide deck, the next one is Visual Studio Code. Now, Visual Studio Code, as you can see here, has a little bit more going on than brackets. It's 100% free. You can get it for Mac, you can get it for Windows, and it's an amazing tool. And let me go ahead and pull up Visual Studio Code for you. And you can see here that we can show different repositories, folders. We've got source control. We can run and debug things if we wanted to. If I click on run and debug, and you can select the environment, let's say, let's do it in Chrome. So these are things that you can do in this file, and you can see it's going to open up Chrome auto-magically for me. And it doesn't display anything. And again, that's because we've just got, let me put something in here. I'll just say my header. So again, if I come up here to run and debug, there we go. And there is my header. Now you'll notice it's got a different color, and that's because there's this style sheet, and we'll get to all of that later. Maybe you remember this from Unit 2 in Foundations of Computer Science. If not, that's okay. We're going to cover it again, but that's why you're seeing the text. And so this is pretty cool, right? To be able to simply click here and then just go ahead and say, run and debug. And again, you could use these hotkeys that it shows you, the up arrow, the clover, and the D. And it says we've got one active session, and there's the style.css file. And you can see this is why the H1 headers are cyan, or that kind of blue color there. All right. So let's go ahead. And again, this is Visual Studio Code, but it's a little more complex than brackets. And it's a little bit different than brackets in the sense that with brackets, I'm going to be showing you how to use brackets in sort of the way you might be using it. And that is you're creating some files, you're putting those files in a directory, and then you want to double click on the file to run it, or right click, control click, and say run with, and then maybe it's Chrome or it's Safari. You know, you get to pick the browser of your choice. All right, for support. Now, these are sort of communities of practice, right? And Stack Overflow is an amazing site. Again, it's free to join the community. All you have to do is click sign up. You can sign up, and then maybe you've got some questions about HTML5, and I'll just put in here, HTML5 doctype line, and I'll hit enter. Now it wants to make sure that I'm a human, so I put that in there, and here we go, right? So now there's all of this information from all of these discussions in here about the HTML5 doctype. Now, does my HTML5 doctype have to be on the very first line? Maybe you've wondered about that as well. And you can see right down here, yes, comments and spaces may come first. Here's the relevant section from the official HTML specification. Well, let's go take a look at that. So when you're writing HTML documents, it gives you all of this information about how the document is going to be parsed. And, you can see the parsing HTML documents. It means parsing is a fancy way of saying how it's going to be read, how each of the lines in the HTML file will be read. And so again, you've got the order in which the starting of the file would be interpreted, right? So optionally, you can use these byte order mark characters. Again, you don't need to do this. This is not something that's going to have to be done. Any number of comments or ASCII white space. So maybe you have some comments at the top of your file, and we'll talk about comments later. And then a doc type. Right? So doc types are required for legacy reasons. When omitted, browsers tend to use a different rendering mode that's incompatible with some specifications. So again, the doc type is a required preamble. This is something that we definitely want to use at the top of the file, which is why I've kind of shown you the doc type in a number of different locations and brackets and the W3 HTML5 reference. And so that's a tag that we're going to become very familiar with moving forward. And finally, let's talk about W3 schools. I cannot recommend this site again highly enough. There's a number of amazing resources that are out there. Everything that you've seen here is free. So really, the limit as to what you're going to be able to create is up to you. I mean, all of the resources are here, and there is the Doctype HTML again. And as you can see, it is in that format that I previously alluded to, with Doctype being capitalized, HTML being lowercase. Now, you'll see here there's no indentation, and you may see this as well. I am a huge proponent of indentation, and I'll tell you why. It makes the code, for me, much easier to read, as opposed to everything being lined up against the left-hand side of the screen. It's just a little easier to read. But here, back to the W3 Schools page, you can click on this and learn HTML. They've got video tutorials. They've got HTML references, CSS, CSS references, JavaScript references, Learn JavaScript. So if we clicked on Learn JavaScript, it's going to take us over to this page here where it's going to start to walk us through some important information about JavaScript. We're going to learn about variables, etc., etc. So there's all kinds of information that you can learn for free out here on the site in addition to what we're going to be talking about. All right, so to wrap this video up, we're now going to transition to two different approaches to working and practicing with our HTML. And I'm going to be going over a number of the tags and explaining what the tags mean as we create our template. And we're going to create that template. I apologize. We're going to come back over here to Safari. We're going to create that template in Repl. So let's come over here to Repl. And this is where I had created a Repl before. And so let's go ahead and say HTML CSS. And I'm just going to give this one, template HTML file. That's what we're going to call this file. I'm going to go ahead and click Create Repl. Again, you can sign up for free. And it is an amazing tool. Now, it says run the Repl to see the output. Well, how do we run it? Well, it's right up here, this big green button that says run. That's how we would run the code that we're going to be placing here. Now, let's talk a little bit about HTML code. So hypertext markup language. And that's really what we're doing. We're marking up text using these HTML tags because that's what we have in here is text. Now, the text may reference images, but the images aren't here, right? It's just simply the text. Now, we've already kind of talked about what this Doctype statement is for. This is declaring the version of HTML with which the browser should interpret or parse this page. Now, that is HTML5. Using that statement right there says the rest of my page, I'm using HTML5 syntax for my page. So let's click Run. And let's see what we get. We get hello world. Now you might be looking down here, and if you've got previous HTML experience, you might be saying to yourself, well, wait a second, Mr. Bonfili, why is there no header tag around hello world? Or why are there no paragraph tags around hello world? How is that working? Well, you can get away with this in the body, between the body tags, and I'll talk about why the body tags or what goes between the body tags in a second. But we can get away with this because the browser, or as we see here, this interpreter, this IDE, this integrated developer environment that we're using, is able to figure this out. Now, here's where we run into the problem. If I said, hello world, this is awesome. Now, you might think there's two different lines of code that are two different lines of text that are going to be output over here on the right-hand side of the screen. You would be incorrect in assuming that. And so what this tells us is that HTML ignores the carriage return. That's what you see happening in here. When I hit the carriage return or the return key on the keyboard and I type in some text, when I hit run, we can see that HTML doesn't acknowledge that. It doesn't respect that return, that carriage return that we're putting in. So while it might look like this is working great, as soon as we go to run it, and what we would see in a web browser is exactly this. And this is where your tags come in. So let's start to talk about the tags up here at the very top. Again, we know the Doctype HTML dictates or indicates, declares the version of HTML being used, and this is for HTML5. Now, you'll notice here that we have the HTML tag, and then at the very bottom that's highlighted, we've got the closing HTML tag. There are some HTML tags that will have an opening tag and then a closing tag. And the difference between the opening tag and the closing tag is that the closing tag will have the / immediately after the less than symbol. And we see that here. Here's the opening tag for head. Here's the closing tag for the head section. And what this is indicating and declaring is this is the beginning of the head section information, and this is the ending of the head section information. This is the beginning of the body of this document, and here's the ending of the body of this document. Now, the HTML tag, which appears immediately after the doc type, this tag is used to declare, or I shouldn't say to declare, this tag is the root of the document tree. So this is the top of the HTML document, right? This is the tag that's used and that must be used in order to indicate this is the root of the HTML that you're about to see follow in between the HTML tags. And as you can see here, I really like the indentation because it gives you a nice visual as to what is the top level of the hierarchy, right? Well, it's this HTML tag right here. And then inside of the HTML tags are all of the other information that we need to put together this HTML file. Now, in the next video, I'm going to be talking about semantic tags versus structural HTML tags. And so it's important to point out here that the HTML tag, the head tag, the title tag, the body tag, and their respective closing tags, those are referred to as structural tags because they dictate the structure of the HTML document, and they dictate how the information is going to be structured. Remember, they don't really dictate the style of the information, they're dictating the structure. And so these are referred to as structural tags, right? Because we need a foundation, we need a structure on top of which we can build our HTML document out. So that's the top level or the root, the root of the document tree, right? And now, if we think of this as the root of the tree, then we've got all these other branches here. They're going to branch off these other HTML tags, like the head tag. Now, what comes between the head tag? And you'll hear me refer to these sometimes as, oops, sorry, I did not want to do that. You'll hear me refer to these sometimes as an element, right? Now, again, typically, tag and element are interchangeable terms, right? Where you might find some purists argue that an HTML element has to have two tags, the opening tag and the closing tag. So they would say, well, this is not an HTML element, right? Because there is no closing meta tag here, right? This is just sort of a self-closing tag, which is also kind of referred to sometimes as an empty element, because there is no closing tag. But again, you're going to find that tag or element, they're kind of interchangeable. But if I was to say the head element, I would be talking about the opening head tag, all of the information inside of the head tag, and then the closing head tag. And this would be the head element, just like this would be the body element of the HTML document, because we have the opening body tag, we have the closing body tag, we have all the information between the body tag. Now, the key thing to remember about the head element is that the head element and the information in the head element is about the page. So the information here is not going to show up. And as we saw, that information does not show up on the right-hand side of the screen here, and it wouldn't show up in a web browser either. Now, I'll talk about the title in a second and where that does show up, and where we're going to look at that is right up here, and we can see it right up here. So you can see it says template HTML file, right? Well, this information, this W3 Schools online web tutorials or Visual Studio Code, code editing redefined, this text is in between the title tags. And you can see here it just says Repl, right? So we could change this. Again, we're not going to see this right here. We will when I go out and show you what we're going to do with this template when we keep it locally on our system. So I'm just going to say my HTML5 template. I'll put my HTML5 awesome template. All right. So this would show up in the tab of the browser. Whatever you have in the title is going to show up here in the tab for the browser. And if it's the only tab that you have, then that's what you're going to see, right? And you can see when I mouse over, it also shows it right below there when it brings up that image, Visual Studio Code - code editing redefined. Where is that information coming from? It's coming from the title. And again, between the head tags, the head element has all of this information about the HTML file, how the browsers should parse. And parse is a fancy way of saying how the browsers should interpret or read the contents of this file. And so let's go down to the next line here. Now, this is a very important line. The meta character set. And sometimes you'll hear people say char set. I usually just say character set or char set, right? And so why is this line important? Because this line is defining the text encoding that's going to be used to interpret what's on this page by the browser. And UTF-8, which it's important to say is the default for HTML5. However, it doesn't hurt to put it in here just in case. And you're going to see me do a lot of things where I'm going to tell you, yeah, it's the default or the browser would figure it out. However, a good best practice is to always think of worst case scenario. What if it doesn't take it in and interpret it with UTF or use the text encoding UTF-8? You may run into issues, right? Now, what are other text encoding? Not to go deep dive into text encoding, but ASCII was one of the original text encodings, and that was English characters only. And so you can see a huge limitation there when you're using ASCII. What if I've got, Cyrillic, Russian characters I need to have displayed on my screen? What about Chinese or Japanese characters that I want to have displayed on my screen? And so that's what this UTF-8 is all about. So again, this is the default encoding for HTML5, but it's important that we put this in here just in case to make sure. Again, it's not going to take us long to drop this line in there, and we're going to have a template file to do that with. So really, we're only going to have to do it once and then sort of wash, rinse, and repeat. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you might hear this referred to as a self-closing tag or an empty element, or sometimes they're referred to as a void element, right? And what that means is we've got this meta char set equal UTF-8, but what we don't have, there's no closing meta tag here, right? Because again, that's not how these self-closing tags work. They work just like this. Now, another sort of good to have in here that you'll see me use often is to put at the end of that self-closing tag a space and then a forward slash and then the greater than sign. Now, you might be looking at this and saying, well, wait a second, why are you putting that in there? Now, there are sort of crazy threads that you'll find out on Stack Overflow where people are going back and forth with each other, arguing about whether you should do this. Do I have to do this? Is it going to work without it? The bottom line is that it would work without it. So I could just leave it like this. However, if this file was going to ever be interpreted or looked at as XML or XHTML, right? XML would not recognize what we have in the file. In order to make it recognizable, you would do something like this when you're working with self-closing tags. So this is not a bad thing. Again, let's run the page, and you can see the page still works. What about up here? What if I was to do a space and then put that forward slash and click run? You can see it's still going to work. And so something that I like to do with the self-closing tags or the empty elements is at the end to put a forward slash before, put a space at the end, a forward slash, and then the greater than sign to close it out. So again, what would I do up here? I would basically say space and then put that forward slash. Now this next line we are going to be getting rid of, and we're going to come back to that line. That's not one that we're going to want in our template initially because we're not going to get to that for a while. But this is the encoding for the file. Now the title we've already talked about. The link, you may remember this from when we were working with, and let me stretch that out a little bit. I want to keep it all on one line here. You may remember this statement. Again, this is about the file, right? And so we have this hyperlink reference that's related to a style sheet. And so here is another sort of antiquated or old statement, this type equal text CSS. I don't have to have that in here. However, it doesn't hurt anything by having it in there, right? So we're going to leave that in there. But again, this is the default, so it's not necessary for me to have that in there. I'm going to leave the style sheet reference in here because we're about to change this. I'm going to say CSS, or we'll say ./CSS. And then we'll have to stretch this out a little bit further here. There we go. And I'm going to explain what I'm doing here in a little bit with the ./CSS. And then we get down to the body tag. Remember, the body tag, it's in between the body tags where you put what you want to have displayed on the screen. Remember, between the head tags, it's just all this information about this HTML page. What's going to be displayed for this HTML page? Well, it's going to be what we have between the body tags. And you'll also notice here's my call to the JavaScript file. And I'm also going to say ./JS/script. I'll explain this in just a second because we're going to do a little cleanup over here on the left-hand side. So now we've got all of this text here that we know is going to work, but we saw what happens when we don't have any of the HTML tags around that text. And so let me rerun it so that we get hello world. Now, how do we fix the fact that we don't want the text to run together if we wanted it to be on different lines? Well, I could use the paragraph tag. Now, again, I could use a header tag, but when I use the paragraph tag, if I hit enter here, and we'll put in another paragraph tag because I want a line between, I want a new line between those two lines. That is the code that I would put. And you can see here, hello world, this is awesome. And you can see we've got this line in between, right? And that's what the paragraph tags will facilitate. Now, again, I could put a header tag in here. We can say H1. And a quick note on the H1 tag is you only want to have one H1 tag per page. Typically, again, there's nothing that says you have to, but that's a good best practice because sometimes if there's multiple H1 tags, search engines might get a little bit confused. And so then I'll just put this is my HTML5 template. Oops, I misspelled template there. And so then we'll end the H1 tag. And again, you'll notice all of my HTML tags are lowercase. And so there we go. We've got our H1 header, and then we've got empty blank line, and then we've got hello world with enclosing the paragraph tags, and then we've got the empty line, and then we've got this is awesome. Now, here's something that you're going to see when I go to do this on my local system, because this is one of the challenges, right? With Codepen or with Khan Academy or with Repl, all of my HTML that I'm working with right now is on their site. So I can copy and paste this, which is ultimately what I'm going to do. However, if you wanted to work locally on your local system, you would want to use one of the text editors that I mentioned earlier, like a Visual Studio Code or I was going to say Adobe Brackets, or just a Brackets, which because it's no longer part of Adobe, or the Brackets or Notepad or Notepad++ or whatever simple text editor. You cannot use Microsoft. Right? You can't use a word processing program because of the formatting information that those word processing programs are putting into the document. It's got to be a plain Jane vanilla text editing program like a Notepad or a Brackets. So here's how I'd like to organize things over here. I've got my sort of main HTML or index.html file here, but I'm going to create a folder, and the folder is going to be called CSS. I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call that images. And then I'm going to create a final folder, and we're going to call that JS for JavaScript, and I'm going to pull these folders out from underneath each other here because they all went into the CSS. I want them to be their own folders. And so it's in the CSS folder that I would put my style.css file. It's in the JavaScript folder that I would put my script.js file. And in terms of images, what I could do here is if I was going to upload a file, I want to grab the Favicon, and I'll talk about what this is later. But again, I'm just kind of demonstrating for you here. This might be how you want to organize. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry, I did that backwards. So that's going to come down here, and this is going to go up into images. And this is how you might want to organize things. It makes it a little easier to keep track of all of the things that you're working with. So you keep all your style sheets in here. You keep all of your images in here. You keep all of your JavaScript scripts in this folder, and it makes it a lot easier to locate things and to find things. And that's why over here, I preceded the style.css file with // meaning this current directory, look for the CSS folder, and in that folder, look for the style.css file. And then the same thing for JavaScript. So let's test this and see if this worked. And again, we'll be coming back to this later. So what if I wanted to do an H1 selector? And I'm just going to put in here color, color, and we'll put in blue. We'll make it simple. Now I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of the line. And now let's go ahead and run the index.html or run the Repl. And you can see that the CSS file was found, because if it wasn't, the H1 heading would not be blue as I had indicated here. And again, it just makes it a lot cleaner. So now let's talk about, we don't want to work here in an online setting. What if you wanted to work offline, meaning on your local computer? Well, let's just go ahead and copy all of this code right here. And I'm going to pull brackets up. So we'll pull up brackets, and I'm going to leave this file here because I like this file with all this information. It's nice to be able to take a look at this, and you get a kind of an idea as to, oh, okay, so here's how I might want to do these things. So let me go ahead and say file new, and I'm just going to call this file, and actually we'll say file save as, and I'm going to save this file right here into where we add images. And so here's my web development folder where I've got some HTML, or I have a folder called HTML. I have a CSS folder, an images folder, and a JavaScript folder. The reason that you don't see the HTML folder in Repl, I didn't create that there because that causes some challenges. And so template.html, and I'm going to replace that template.html file, and then I'm just going to paste in what we had in Repl. And this is still true, right? That's going to be ... to go up one directory. And then we're going to come down here and do the same thing. We're going to go up one directory and then into the JS directory. And that's where we would find that information. And so here is my HTML template file, right? And maybe I don't want to keep all of these lines here. Maybe I just want the header. So now I'm going to go ahead and say file and save. And you might be wondering, okay, well, how do you run this? How is it that you get this to display in the web browser, right? So the way that I'm going to show you is we're going to pull up Finder, and you can do this with Windows Explorer. Let me move it over here. And so here are the 4 folders that contain all of my information. So we'll go into the HTML folder, and there's the template.html file. Let me just go do a control click, open with. I can open it with Brave, Chromium, all these different web browsers. Let's choose Google Chrome. And there we go. This is my HTML5 template. And so that's what this file would look like when I run it in Google Chrome. And again, this is working in an offline capacity. So now let's go ahead and let's make sure that the CSS or the style sheet can be found. And so how would I do that? Well, let me go ahead and say file new, and then we'll say file save as, and I'm just going to create my style.css. So I'll say style.css, and we're going to put this not in the HTML folder, but in the CSS folder. And let's again say H1, there's our selector, and then let's put the properties for that selector in here. Specifically, we're going to go ahead and put in, again, we'll say color, and I don't know what Bisq is, but let's give it a go. And I'm going to say File Save. So I'm going to save my file here. And let's come back over here. Oops, sorry, come back over to the browser and let's refresh. And that is what Bisq looks like. So again, I was successfully able to locate the style.css file that I have indicated in my template.html. And again, the dot in this context on a Linux system simply means go up one directory, which would put me back into the directory with all of the folders, and then go into the CSS folder and then look for the style.css file. And again, this is a fantastic way to organize things. It's very easy on the eye. When we're over here, I know exactly where my files are going to be located. My JavaScript is here. Images are going to be in here. My HTML is in there. My CSS is going to be in here, right? All right, well, that is going to do it for our introduction to the world of HTML and JavaScript and CSS. Again, we didn't do any JavaScript yet. We're going to be getting to that soon. So tags, templates, and tools. And here is a summary, right? Very good to sort of summarize what we talked about. The Doctype HTML tag declares the version of HTML in use. The HTML tags specify the start and end of the document tree or the root of the HTML document. The HTML lang en tag uses an attribute to declare the document language. And so actually, let me digress here for just a quick second. If I go to my template file, that's something that we didn't do, is in some of the opening tags, we can put attribute value pairs like the language equal to, and you can see, take a look at that. It's giving me a list of all the different languages I can choose. And all that is doing, all that attribute, that's the attribute and the value. So the attribute value pair, all this is doing is when the browser's opening my page, I'm letting it know right up front that this page is English language, right? And again, it might not be required at all times. However, it is not a bad idea to have this in there so that it takes away any of the guessing that might take place. And so let's make this, let's save this. We definitely want this to be part of our template right now. Again, we're going to be adding and growing this template substantially as we work through the course and as we make our way through the course. But that's an attribute value pair. Now, the head tag tags contain between them information about the page, as opposed to information displayed on the page. The meta char set UTF-8 self-closing tag defines the text encoding to be used. We want UTF-8. That's going to give us the widest range of possibilities. You could literally type ASCII in here, and that might be a recipe for disaster, right? That's why we say UTF-8. That is the default for HTML5. However, again, it doesn't hurt to include it. The title tags contain the title of the page displayed when the tab containing the page or the top of the browser, if that's the only page, is hovered over with the mouse. If we go back to the page that we opened up here, take a look when I hover over that page. My HTML5 awesome template. There it is right there. That's the exact text we typed into that template.html file. Now, we're going to talk about the little icon right here. Right now, we've got sort of the cruddy, plain vanilla default icon. We don't have the cool quote fancy or the Amazon or Visual Studio Code. These are called favicons, right, that you see up here. And we're going to get to those soon. The body tags, those are the tags between which you will place all of the content you want to be displayed on your web page. And finally, the HTML head, title, and body tags and their associated closing tags are considered to be HTML structural tags as opposed to semantic tags. And the semantic tags, and this is our segue, we're going to get into the HTML tags and we're going to look at some more structural tags, and then we're going to look at the semantic tags in our next video tutorial. All right, so that is going to do it for this introductory lesson number 1, taking a look at HTML tags, templates, and tools. that we're going to use and that we're going to need to be successful in not just this course, but outside of this course. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, please make sure that you contact me. And if not, I will see you in class. Have a great Thanksgiving and enjoy the rest of the holiday season.